G'day, boys and girls. Here we are.
Hello, how are you?
I'm totally prepared, Ross.
Are
Absolutely
you really?
prepared. Oh yeah, I was well on top of being here. G'day,
Good.
Dave. G'day, Timothy. Oh, Timothy was first in.
All right, all
Hey,
right. Is there an
second.
award for that? Do we
You
give?
got there must be. We should have an award,
I
but
tell you
there
what.
it is. No, I was. I thought I had plenty of time, and then you reminded me that there was a time change because now we have shifted into winter time,
Yep.
and you are over there doing summery things, spring, and
Oh,
so I lost an hour like that. An
well, it
hour
was
just
funny
disappeared.
because when I messaged you, your response sounded a little bit strange, and I was thinking, well, does that mean he's going to come in a few minutes earlier? And I looked at my little international clock, and I wasn't sure what you meant. But anyway, we're
We're
here.
here.
Hello, that's DJ saying hello to us. Hey, Scott.
G'day, DJ. Hello, mate. And Scott.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm totally awake. I have my coffee, and it's all good. Hey, listen,
Yep.
we are going to Egypt. This is so significant. Why? Because we're going to be talking a little bit about that today.
That's right.
Tis the season, Pesach, Passover, and we are doing Egypt. G'day, Stephen
Hey,
and
Stephen.
Jordan. We are following. It is the ultimate Tanakh tour, and we're going to be doing an Exodus flavored tour, if you like. Can
Wow.
I say it that way?
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Beginning in Egypt, on through to Jordan, including a Nile cruise, including the traditional Mount Sinai, into Jordan, Petra, Wadi Rum, Nebo, all of these places. And then the second leg of the Tanakh tour, you can do both if you like. And if you sign up to both, you'll get a $100 combination discount.
That's right.
Is Israel, of course, as we do every year. This coming November, we would love for you to join us, dear viewers. And you can do that by going to tanakhtours.com, tanakhtours.com, and sign
Pretty
up.
well.
Sign up today.
There it
And we
is.
still
Right
have,
there.
there it is, we still have a little bit of room in the Egypt Jordan tour. And we'd love for you to join us. G'day, Pam.
Hey,
Good to
Pam.
see you. All right, you guys. So this is going to be a really interesting show today because, as I said, it's the season, and we are going to be discussing the Passover. But before we do that, right,
Right.
Ross, author of wonderful books such as the one over your shoulder there, which is, of course, the Moses Scroll. If you haven't read it yet, you need to get a copy of that and read that because we're going to be talking about that a lot as we progress. But the other book that is on the shelf is no longer just on the shelf, but is available in a Kindle version now. Ross, tell us about it.
Well, just a second, Jono, because this
Mm-hmm.
silly camera thing, I had a problem with this the other night. I am just about to. There we go.
I'm glad you're having problems too. I mean, I've only just woken up.
I don't know what's going on. I don't
Don't worry
understand
about
why
it.
it does this, but
These are the words. You figure that out while I do this. These are the words. So
how about
it's
that?
we've been plugging this for a little while, but this is the most frequent Hebrew words in the Tanakh in the order of their frequency. So you can read them according to how often they appear in the text. You can learn them that way, and it's ideal. It's just absolutely brilliant. And not only is it available in like this paperback, but now finally it is available in a Kindle as well. You can go to Amazon and order one and take it with you. I mean, the great thing about this is that you can just chuck it in a bag. It's a small little pocketbook. And look, Ross has disappeared
Hey,
altogether.
I'm listening to you, Jono. I'm just trying to get my camera to work right.
You do that. It's a little pocketbook you can put in your pocket, but this one can just be on your phone, so on your Kindle. So you can do that by going to Amazon. These are the words, Ross K. Nichols. Add that to your list, and it's probably stupidly cheap. I don't even how. G'day, Belinda. What have you priced on the Kindle version, Ross?
Well, let's see. Here we go. Hold on. Let me get this
Mm,
camera thing straight. I am getting closer. You,
yeah.
1 second. 1 second. Okay. All right. We're going to try it again, Jono.
All right, go on.
Now tell me if the camera's still right. No?
All I can see is your little author photo.
This
Tell us how much the Kindle version of These Are the Words are on
Okay,
Amazon.
the Kindle version is $9.99. It just went active today.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm excited about that. I really didn't think it was going to be on this quickly. Sometimes it takes just a little bit of time before things go active. So
It's a
I was
Passover miracle.
excited. Yeah, it is. It's a Passover
Mm,
miracle.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
give
So
me
there we
one.
are. So
No, you're going to have to keep rolling and talking because this
this is
thing is
fine.
driving me crazy. I can't
So
concentrate until I get it right.
you do that, and while you're doing that, let me kick off with something that I shared at the conference, the 79th annual conference at United Israel in Louisiana last year. By the way, the 80th is about to kick off, and that is that in April? This it's April, right?
That's right. April 21st through the 23rd.
Now, people can watch this online, or
Yep, we are going
what?
to have that online. It's going
All
to be
right, so you can do
nice.
that.
Yeah,
But if
we're
you
going
want
to
to
have.
attend in person, it's going to be in North Carolina and Charlotte, and it at the UI Center there. It doesn't cost anything. You can attend for free, but they do want you to register so they know what sort of numbers to cater for. And you can do that by going to the link that in a minute Ross will put on the screen, and we'll let you know.
Yep.
Now, Scott just said, Ross, we can't hear you. We can hear you. We can hear you. We just can't see you. Yeah, we
Well,
don't
that
need to see
might be
Ross,
the
do
way
we?
we
We
have
only
to
need to
do it.
hear him.
If I could just set this up where it's not even a problem, like I could just look,
Oh, hey, you're back. All right. It's
I'm back.
on.
I don't even know what camera that is, and I don't care.
Doesn't matter.
All
As
right,
long as we can see you. That's
that's
your
right.
laptop. That's
Yep,
your laptop camera.
that's right. That's right.
Done.
Okay.
All right. So what I was going to say, Ross, was seeing that you were in the void. I was going to kick off with one of the things that I spoke about at the conference last year, but maybe we'll hold on to that. Let's just put that in the pocket, and we can talk about some texts because we've been talking about textual criticism of late.
Yeah.
Perhaps we can talk about some of the texts in relation to Pesach, perhaps in relation to the plagues, as it is written in the
Well,
Tanakh.
let me say one thing. One of the things that I wanted to say now that I'm not
Now that you're back,
distracted,
yeah.
yeah, is that I've called. You'll see the title on this video is "Issues We Can't Pass Over During Passover."
Mm-hmm.
So these are textual issues, and that could be somewhat troubling for a lot of people, especially since Passover is such a major part of biblical revelation.
Mm.
In other words, if there's a problem, if there are issues with the text concerning Passover, then that's a little bit concerning. So
It
I,
is because
yeah,
it is the story that revolves around the national revelation,
yeah,
the revelation narrative upon which the entire Bible is based.
yeah,
These are the stories that revolve around the center of the text. Continue.
yep. And what I was going to say is I'll be working on Passover theme, as many of us will, for the entire week. In fact, I
Hmm.
have a couple of books that I have out. Some of our viewers have probably read. Here's one. This one's by Richard Elliott Friedman called
Mm.
The Exodus. Very good book. I enjoyed it. He brings up some good points. I don't agree with everything that he says, but it is an interesting book. This one
Hmm.
I just got. I haven't read it yet, but it's called The Exodus: Historicity, Chronology, and Theological Implications. And there are 6 scholars who present their view of the Exodus, if you will, the
Hmm.
Exodus theme, from Exodus chapter 12 all the way through. And then the other scholars take turns kind of not really picking it apart, but offering counters to their particular arguments or their particular case. So I'm
Okay.
looking forward to reading that. I hope to
Yeah.
get to it this week. But when you talk about the Exodus, I mean, it's basically the same story. Everybody knows the story, right? You go, well, the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt.
Hmm.
And the Pharaoh, at first they were friendly toward the Israelites, and then they turned bad, and a new king arose over. And everyone can run through the steps. But when you begin to really dig deeply and you begin to look at the text of the Bible relative to the Exodus story, you start seeing a couple of issues. Quick example: how does Israel end up in Egypt?
Hmm.
Right? Well, Joseph, remember, Joseph is sold as a slave. But then when you really look at that story, within that story, you have to ask yourself, who brings Joseph to Egypt?
Mhm.
Is it the Midianites?
Is it
Is it
the
the
is the
Midianites?
Ishmaelites?
Or could be the Ishmaelites, or
Could be.
maybe, a lot of apologists will say, well, they're Ishmaelites, but they're also from Midian, and so people look for
Mhm.
ways to explain it. But then we have to ask, which sea did they cross when they left? Is it the one at the Nile Delta? Is it,
Is
at
it the Gulf
the
of Aqaba? Is it
hey,
the
speaking of the Gulf of Aqaba, on
Yeah.
our schedule when we're going out of Egypt
Mm.
into Jordan, we've got two options. We have to see logistically if we can do this.
Mm.
One option that may happen, we don't know yet, is we might take a ferry, unless we could split the water, which, by the way, it would be hundreds of feet deep there. A
Right.
lot of people picture in the movies, it just kind of opens up
Yeah,
and
it's just a
people are,
shallow little
yeah, it's like over your, maybe not even over your head, but over my head. But this would be hundreds of feet. But anyway,
Mm.
or we might just stop at Nueva and look
Mhm.
at it and then continue on and cross the border. Anyway, so where was Sinai? Which part of the Red Sea? Because the Bible calls Yam Suf the Nile Delta.
Mhm.
It refers to the Gulf of Suez as Yam Suf, and it
Mhm.
refers to the Gulf of Aqaba.
Sure.
And then the other thing, and you almost kicked off with this, it
Mhm.
might be fun to get into it pretty soon, is this idea of the plagues. Because how many plagues were there,
Mm.
Jono? How many do most people say there were? 10.
10. Mm.
Everybody know. If we had a test right now and we said, write down how many plagues there were,
Yeah.
people may not be able to list them in order. But my question is, can the biblical writers even list them in order?
Mm. There's a question.
Because we have three different lists. We can follow the narrative in Exodus. That gives us one list, one order,
Mhm.
one arrangement of those, and clearly numbering 10. But if we go to Psalm 78, we get another list. If we go to Psalm 105, we get another list. Psalm
Is that right?
78 only lists 7 plagues. Now, I know a lot of people would say, well, yeah, but Psalm 78 and Psalm 105, those are poetic, and maybe there's not that. But again, I mean, it's an issue.
Mhm.
So which one do we go with? Are there 10 plagues, or were there not 10 plagues? Do we, how do we answer that?
Were there plagues indeed to begin with, Ross? Is
Okay.
another question.
Yeah.
Mm. So,
Yep.
so these are some of the things that we want to address. Where do you want to go with it?
Well, let me ask you this. Let's bring up another issue. We may not solve all these issues in 45 minutes, but here's one more. In Genesis chapter 15,
Mm.
Abraham, according to the text, the narrative in Genesis, has a vision. Remember the divided pieces, and
Mhm.
torch passes through, and
Yeah,
he's
kinda
told
gruesome.
in this ominous vision, if you
Mm.
will, that that his descendants will be slaves in a strange land for 400 years.
Mhm.
But then when you look at Exodus, the account in Exodus chapter 12, verse 40 through 41, it says 430 years.
Mhm.
Again, are we being too picky with the text? I mean,
Well, no, we're not at all, because when you, then do the, when you count up according to the genealogy, it works out to be something like 270 years, if I remember correctly.
yeah, I think it's
Um,
in Exodus 6, it's like 215 years if you look at,
215, is it?
I think
Yeah.
it says Levi is 137, and then when you add
Mhm.
in the 40 years where Moses is in Midian. Now, I know a lot of people, if I could, I don't want to touch a camera right now. I can't
No,
seem
don't do
to get
that.
that right. But behind me, I have a shelf on chronological questions
Mm.
related to the biblical text. And there are, I have 5 or 6 of those books where they try to make sense of this. And I've wrestled through that quite often myself. It's a difficult problem when you begin to look at those kind of details. So,
Mm. Mm. Oh, significant.
yeah.
Um, where shall we go from here?
Well, let me ask this. Let's start with Passover is a major element in the Hebrew Bible, particularly the Pentateuch. It is, according to Exodus 12, Exodus 12 says, this is the beginning of the year. And so everything hinges, a lot of the rabbis discuss that the beginning of the year, it's really the beginning of Israel. The Exodus is the beginning of Israel.
Mm.
So you look at Exodus 12, of course, you have Leviticus 23, you have Numbers 28, you have all of these passages which deal with the Passover. Now, one of the questions that I wanted to just touch on is this idea that of the importance that's placed on Passover in the Bible. A lot of people believe that Passover was kept, some say, uninterrupted from the Exodus to the modern day. And then people might say, as the Orthodox at my local Chabad keep it, some people would say, well, we understand that a lot of that is newer, it's not, doesn't go back. I mean, I doubt that the children of Israel were sitting around reclined, drinking 4 glasses of wine and,
Right.
hiding the afikomen and things like that.
Mm.
But how many Passovers are actually in the Bible? I want to get to your point about the plagues in a moment, but
Mm-hmm.
so you have Exodus 12 and following when the children of Israel leave, and that's the beginning of 40 years in the wilderness. Now, in the Pentateuch, there's only one other Passover mentioned, and it's in the second year, right? It's Numbers chapter 9, I believe. It's in the second year, and there were some who were unclean, and they couldn't participate. And they went to Moses and they asked him, hey, we couldn't because we had touched the dead. And at that point, a second Passover is established for the second month, 14th day of the month. But it's only for those who were impure, right? All right. Now, we go, and if you need to jump in, go ahead. I was just going to say.
No, I was just going to say. So, if I remember correctly, that is the second one that is observed, as far as we know, within the text, and then we assume that every single year from that point on, a Passover ceremony was conducted. The memorial of the Exodus was done at the beginning of the year. G'day, Marianne.
Hey, Marianne.
And all the way up to the present day. But we get something different from the time of Josiah, right?
We do. In fact, one other element before that. So you go from Numbers chapter 9. The next one, there's one in Joshua 5. Now, here's what's interesting. What is the one thing that, according to the Passover narrative in Exodus, that you have to have? You have to be circumcised, right? But for some strange reason, we read in Joshua that no one who left, other than those who were circumcised at the beginning, there were no circumcisions in the
They didn't
wilderness.
circumcise in the wilderness, is what
I
we're to
wonder why.
understand.
I wonder why. Here, a couple other points on that. And I know this might feel like we're just drive-by on all this, but just
No, keep going.
I want to bring some of these thoughts up. People have 8 days, 7 days to think about these things. So the circumcision is an interesting question because we also get this strange account in Exodus chapter 4 where Moses gets in trouble. It's kind of vague. It's kind of, people aren't real sure what to do with this text. Remember, he didn't circumcise one of his boys, evidently. And then
God decided to kill him.
Yeah, it's kind of unclear, but maybe, yeah. And why? Because he didn't circumcise, and Zipporah circumcises and throws the foreskin down and calls him a bridegroom of blood. And interestingly enough, by the way, Deuteronomy never mentions circumcision of the flesh. It does, on the other hand, mention circumcision of the heart in Deuteronomy 10 and Deuteronomy 30.
Right.
So that's kind of strange. All right. So then, like you said, you fast forward. So now the most important festival, Pesach, you get this account in Exodus 12, Numbers 9, Joshua 5, all through Judges, 1st, 2nd Samuel, no mention. That's odd. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
would think that somewhere in there. Now, some would just say, well, they didn't have room to write everything, Ross. But what's striking is that the next time we encounter Pesach, it's in the days of Hezekiah. In Hezekiah's time, 2 Chronicles chapter 30, Hezekiah has a Passover. Interestingly enough, it also ties into this second Passover. He invites everybody from the northern kingdom and the southern. He wants to bring everybody and unite them. And 2 Chronicles is very, very clear on this. Remember, 2 Kings 18 says that Hezekiah is the greatest king.
Mm.
But then a couple of chapters later, that's 2 Kings 18. 2 Kings 23, he was only the greatest until Josiah,
Josiah.
because according to 2 Kings 23, Josiah
Mm-hmm.
is the greatest king ever.
Yeah.
Now, in Josiah's day, let me get I have a desk full of books. I told you mine looks worse than yours, but
I'm telling you, if you could see my desk, I guarantee it's worse than yours. Absolutely. I'm about to have an avalanche of books, I think.
I've got the same thing going on. Now,
Right.
In the days of Josiah,
Mm.
there is a great Passover.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing is, it tells us how great that Passover is. And in one account, it says that there's not been, so you have Kings and Chronicles, 2 Kings 23 and 2 Chronicles 36.
Mm-hmm.
One says there's not been a Passover kept like this since the time of the judges.
Right.
And the other says, and since the time of, is it Joshua? So we've got
Joshua, yeah.
we've got all of this time when no one evidently has kept
Mm.
arguably the greatest festival of all.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, yeah,
Centuries have passed.
yeah.
Yeah.
So you have to wonder what's going on with this Passover. And then I'm going to teach this coming Saturday on Jeremiah, the Passover in the days of Jeremiah. And one of the passages that we're going to read, and I'm going to make a big point of this on Saturday, is that Jeremiah says, "No longer will it be said, 'The Lord lives, who brought the children of Israel up out of the land of Egypt,'
Mm-hmm.
but 'The Lord lives, who brought the children of Israel out of all the lands.'" So this coming Exodus, if you will, according to
Mm-hmm.
the prophet Jeremiah, and there are other passages which seem to support this in other prophets, that something's coming which is going to be so great that no longer is it going to be said.
Mm-hmm.
You're not even going to talk about the Exodus from Egypt. So does that mean Passover will no longer be kept, Jono?
Mm.
I mean,
Seeing that, of course, Passover centers on that particular event,
yeah,
as we
because
understand it.
it's really made me think about this. For a long time, I've been in what could be called, for lack of a better phrase, how would you put it? Torah faith movement. The Torah,
Mm.
and I went from a fundamentalist Christian as a child and growing up, where the
Same.
law had been done away with. It was no until then I switched and I said, wait a minute. The Torah is eternal. It's going to be forever and
Mm.
always. And then I would read things like Jeremiah said, and I thought, how uncomfortable would it be in the Olam Haba, let's say, to say, okay, it's time to read the Torah reading, which talks about the Exodus from Egypt. And
Mm.
everybody looks at you and says, what? Because you're not even going to bring that up. You see what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Same
Yeah.
thing with the ark. No longer will
Right.
it be mentioned.
Mm.
All right. Now,
Before you do, g'day to Glenn, who just tuned in.
hey, Glenn, and I saw Belinda earlier. Is she on
She's
as
there.
well?
They're both going to be joining us on the Tanakh tour this year.
Excellent. And
Yeah.
I've already told people I'll have this published hopefully this week. So
The itinerary?
yeah, I'm going to put it out.
Ooh. All
You
right.
have to
Okay.
read it first, give it the
Okay.
blessing, and then we'll
I'm gonna
go
give
with
it the
it.
blessing after this show. Okay, go.
All of that to say, as you started when we talked about this upcoming tour,
Mm,
it is Exodus themed, meaning we're going to fly into Cairo. We'll follow, as it were, the children of Israel through the land of Egypt
the tradition will be good.
into the ancient land of Moab and Ammon and Edom, Moab,
Mm,
Ammon, and then into the land of Israel.
yeah.
So, a huge part of the Passover Seder and the biblical account is the 10 plagues, Jonah. Now, you've
Mm,
got an interesting theory, and I've heard bits and pieces of it before, and it ties to this difficulty about how many plagues are there, and are there
mm.
10 plagues, and maybe you could hit on that. Are you ready
It's
to
a good
do
place
that?
to start because I'm quite convinced of this. So I'll just quickly, as I mentioned, I gave this to the people at the conference last year. I'll do it quickly again. But I want everyone to turn to, what is it, Numbers chapter 14, verses 20 and 21, I think it is, if I remember correctly.
All right.
And what that is a representation of something taken from the Moses scroll. It's got some inconsistencies. There's some differences, some significant differences, which we're going to highlight. But it is off the back, Ross, of God being none too happy about the fact that. Well, let me read it from the Moses scroll because the Moses scroll kicks off like this. Elohim, our Elohim, spoke to us in Horeb, saying, "You have dwelt long enough at this mountain, Horeb. Turn and set out for yourselves and go to the hill country of the Amorites and to the dwellers of the Arava and in the mountains and the foothills and the coast of the sea." And we set out from Horeb and we walked. This is Moses recounting in the Moses scroll. We set out and we walked from Horeb, that great and fearful wilderness which you came and saw, to Kadesh Barnea. And I said unto you, okay, so we've come to the hill country of the Amorites. Go up and possess the land as he spoke to you, unto you. But you were unwilling to go up, and you murmured, and you said in hatred of us to exterminate us. And Elohim was angered. He was displeased. He swore, saying, and here it is, as I live, surely all the people who have, Ross, seen my signs and my wonders these 10 times, which I did these 10 times, since they have not listened to my voice, they will not see the good land that I swore to give their fathers, except the little ones, Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua bin Nun, son of Nun, who stands before you. They will go there. I will give it to them. But you turn for yourselves and set out towards the wilderness in the direction of the Red Sea, Yam Suf, as you mentioned. Once the entire generation of men of the rebellion have completely died off from the midst of the camp, and you dwelt in Kadesh Barnea until the men of the rebellion had completely died from the midst of the camp. All right, so that's the introduction of the Moses scroll. And what we want to pick up on is that line, all the people who have seen my signs and my wonders, which I did these 10 times. So we go to Numbers chapter 14. And is it
Okay.
21 and 22? Is that where we are?
Yes.
Read it for me, Ross.
All right. I'm reading from the JPS. Is that
Mm,
okay?
do it.
And the Lord said, I pardon as you have asked. Nevertheless, as I live and as the Lord's presence fills the whole world, none of the men who have seen my presence and the signs that I have performed in Egypt in the wilderness and who have tried me these 10 times, JPS says many, and have
Mhm.
disobeyed me, shall see the land that I promised an oath to their fathers. None of those who spurn me shall see it, but my servant Caleb, and etc.
And so on and so
So
forth. So
now,
clearly, the crossover is it gives itself away that this section in Numbers chapter 14 is clearly taken from the Moses scroll here, but it's got some alterations, it's got some inconsistencies, there's some significant differences right there. And some of those are that the narrative in Numbers chapter 14, verses 21 to 22, the variations include the fact that Numbers refers to my presence and my signs instead of my signs and my wonders. Actually, while we're talking about that, Idan Dershowitz has a different translation for signs and wonders. Do you remember what that is?
I do. Actually, I have it. I opened it up. He says all the people. This is Idan Dershowitz's translation of the Shapiro manuscripts.
Mm-hmm.
All the people who perceived the declarations and affirmations that I made 10 times over and did not have faith or heed my voice.
Right. The
Interesting.
declarations and affirmations. This
Yeah.
is interesting, and maybe we'll touch on that in a minute. But traditionally, we translate it as signs and wonders, and that may be it may be spun that way because of the narrative that we get in chapter in Exodus. We'll get back
Yeah.
to that. The other variation, of course, is that numbers refers to these 10 times in relation to the number of rebellious acts that the people committed that were trying God, rather than the number of the signs and wonders themselves.
Yeah.
So, reading the passage in Numbers, you would understand. And I put this question to the people at the conference: when you read in Numbers that the people tried God these 10 times, does it prompt you to go back and find those? Because Numbers doesn't say, "Oh, there was this one and this one and this one and this one and
Right.
this one and this one." And it doesn't do that. And Joe Dell, who was there, g'day Joe Dell, who has been on the Tanakh tour.
Yep.
She raised her hand and she said, I did exactly that. That prompted me to go back and have a look. And she said, I found 14. And this is what happens. And the Moses Scroll is no different. The Moses Scroll says in its opening, the people who have seen my signs and wonders, which I did these 10 times, since they have not listened to my voice, they will not go into the good land. But it doesn't tell the reader what those 10 signs and wonders were. It's not interested in future readers of the text because Moses is talking to the contemporary audience.
Yeah.
They know what he's referring to and what God is referring to.
So let me ask a
And
question.
go
So
ahead.
what you're presenting is that perhaps when the text was originally written in whatever
Mm,
form, and that's what critical, careful exegesis is about, getting back to that original form. So
mm.
are you suggesting then that when it first says these 10 times, since it didn't qualify perhaps what the 10 times were, that later scribes might have said, well, let me start adding 10 times? Or
Well, I think that it creates the inevitable question of what signs and wonders? What 10 times? What signs
yeah,
and wonders are you talking about? That question asks, as people often say in theology, where there's a vacuum, people love to fill it.
yeah,
And it does create a vacuum, and people want to supply the backstory. Again, the nature of the Moses Scroll is not so concerned with future readers um, as far as the narrative is concerned, because Moses is talking that he's just saying, you remember when this happened? You remember when that happened? And
yeah,
then this happened, and then that happened. They're all going, oh, yeah, we remember that.
yeah,
And that's the way it reads all the way through. So we're left with that question. What is this in relation to? And so we have a story that is supplied, and there's a clue as to where this story begins, and it's actually in the phrase "my signs and my wonders." Notice it's of course, in the first person.
yeah.
God is speaking, and He
You're in the
says,
Moses scroll.
"You're in the Moses
Yeah,
scroll, my signs and my wonders." It doesn't appear in Numbers, that phrase. What we have is my signs and my wonders, which I did these 10 times. Where does that phrase appear? It is only quoted verbatim once in the Torah, in the entirety of the Tanakh, in fact, and that's at the beginning of the 10 plagues narrative in Exodus chapter 7, verse 3. Do you have that there?
that's where I went. Yeah.
Yeah. What do we got?
But I will harden Pharaoh's heart that I may multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt.
Hmm. And if we look at the Hebrew, it is absolutely identical. My signs and my wonders.
Yeah.
So the narrative is created to answer specifically the question that is prompted by reading the Moses Scroll. It's not prompted by reading Numbers chapter 14, because Numbers is saying, oh, no. The 10 times is the amount of times that the Israelites tried God in the wilderness. But when you read the Moses scroll, you require an answer to that question. Someone's going to step in and say, introduce it and say, these are my signs and my wonders. And then we have a narrative of 10 plagues. That's where it comes from. Now, let me throw into that mix,
Okay.
just very briefly, and we won't get into this because it's long. It's much longer discussion. But there is a book by Joshua Berman called Inconsistencies in the Torah, and he touches on the Battle of Kadesh, Ramses II in 1275, the Battle of Kadesh, and the remarkable similarities of imagery between that particular event in history, the most documented battle that we have, ancient battle, the biggest chariot battle ever in history. I mean, this is a major significant moment. And there's an enormous amount of imagery that is paralleled to the story of the Exodus and the crossing of the sea and things like that. And the theory is that a lot of that indeed was taken from the Battle of Kadesh, that the stories were embellished and even fabricated into the book of Exodus, taken from imagery that, in fact, Ramses II created, like big giant billboards, if you like, of look at how great I was, and the
Stelas. You're saying
stelas.
there are actually monuments? Because I
There
haven't.
are monuments that hopefully we're going to see some of those. I'm really looking forward to seeing some of those if we can when we're in Egypt, because some of them are still there today. And even though it was, most historians would agree that it was a defeat for Egypt, traveling all the way north to maintain Kadesh, the Hittites fought them back. They did not regain, the Egyptians did not regain Kadesh. So if you really want to have an interesting Passover spin, go and read about the Battle of Kadesh, because I think it's far more relevant than most of us realize. Just
Interesting.
even the wiki on it is absolutely fascinating.
So let me ask you this: if
Go ahead.
this theory that Behrman and some of these other guys and you've looked into, the idea that you're suggesting is that there was actually a great battle in antiquity in the time of Ramesses II,
Mm,
in which the Egyptians were literally defeated. And it's one that, more than any other documented story from archaeology,
hmm
matches what we think we know from the biblical narratives. In other words, Pharaoh's horses and chariots in the water, that
In
kind
the
of
water,
thing.
yeah, that sort of thing, all that sort of stuff. I mean, it is again, as I mentioned, the biggest chariot battle in history. It is on the river on Tondes, I think it's called. Um, and there is an enormous amount of lives lost in that river as they're being driven into the river, up in Kadesh. There, it's remarkable, and there's an uncanny amount of, um, if you like, coincidental imagery that overlaps both of these narratives, and uh, the idea in Berman's book is that clearly biblical writers borrowed imagery supplied to them by Ramses II. Some by the Hittites have reliefs as well, but mostly Ramses saying, it wasn't a defeat; it was a victory. Look, look, look! Let me show you how great I am." And reinterpreted those to create a biblical story. So we have those now. Now I would just add to that. Uh, Berman asserts that this is the case. I would suggest that there's something about the Battle of Kadesh that enabled Israel to leave Egypt. There's something about the Battle of Kadesh and the whipping that Egypt got that enabled a vassal state, if you like, to leave the territory of Egypt and go and free themselves, be liberated from the Egyptians. And I would suggest that it is the Battle of Kadesh that enabled them to do that. And so when the Moses scroll mentions, remember what God did for you, liberating you from Egypt, I would suggest that it is the Battle of Kadesh that we're to remember. So
It's
this is a whole lot of, no doubt this is freaking some people out, but go and read
yeah,
about it, boys and
it's
girls.
freaking me out. No, look,
No.
but to your point about the Moses scroll, there's an interesting thing that I noticed looking into something else. I wanted to know, what does the Moses scroll have to say about the Exodus theme, right? What is that? And there are several passages that are in the Moses scroll that have to do with. Quickly, can I go through them quickly?
Do it, because you sent to me a little Moses scroll Haggadah, like
I
which was
did, and it was
very brief.
yeah, it's really brief. But remember, you're supposed to be able to eat this meal in haste, and so you could do
There you
this
go.
one, and you'd be. In fact,
You'd be on your
uh,
way.
yeah, Glenn and Belinda said they're going to do this, so they need to really pay attention.
Mm.
E, fragment E, and the column B
Hmm.
has the following. These are the references to Egypt and being freed and so forth. It says, I am Elohim, your Elohim. This is part of the 10 words, by the way, who liberated you from the land of Egypt, from a house of servitude or the house of
Hmm.
slaves. In fact, it's probably better translated, Avdim is slaves, servants. Um, so it kicks off just like the 10 words in both Exodus and Deuteronomy, Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5, with one exception. And that exception is it uses a different verb. So whereas Exodus and
Liberate.
Deuteronomy both use a verb that says brought you forth, mean
Brought you out
caused
or
you to
brought you forth. Yeah.
exit,
Mm.
here it says liberated and freed. And there was a lot of controversy around this. If
Hmm.
you're a forger, why would you insert a totally different word that no one really had seen used in this particular context?
Because a liberated people by God are a liberated people, and
Yeah,
as we see, politicians and powers that be don't like liberated people.
yeah,
You were brought out. You were brought out, okay, and now you're under us, and we have a monarchy, and we have a priesthood, and you will do what we tell you to do. But you're absolutely not liberated. Good heavens.
yeah. Well, let me
Maybe, maybe.
let me touch on that one word just quickly. Edon put forth an interesting theory. You've heard of the Nash Papyrus. Before the
Hmm.
discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the
Hmm.
Nash Papyrus was considered the earliest biblical text ever discovered, and it's written. And one of the things that's interesting, that space where you would hope to find brought you forth, which most people have written that in as if that's
Hmm.
what it says. Edon Dershowitz has measured it and said that word does not fit there.
Mm.
But this word, he proposed that this word that's used in the Moses scroll would fit there.
Mm.
That's an interesting theory. If one of the earliest texts that we have, excuse me, would match this. Now he's got some really high quality photos. He's looking to
Mm.
make that point, yes or no.
Because there's a
So
hole there, Ross. Is
there
that
is
right? There's a
there
hole.
there is. It's a bad spot on the scroll.
Mhm.
I do see Dave's question there. Let me pull this up on the
Yeah,
screen
Dave
for you.
said the date of the Battle of Kadesh is 1274 BCE. That, according to conventional dating, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, that is later than the Exodus, according to some, by hundreds of years. Do you mean that after the book of Exodus? Do you mean that after the book of Exodus was written? Um, sorry, how do you understand that, Ross?
Uh, he can qualify that a little bit for us. I think he's asking the question about the dating. Does the
Mm.
dating coincide, or would the Book of Exodus be written after this point? Or I think that's what he's asking.
Yeah,
Well,
I would absolutely suggests that the book of Exodus is written way after this point.
Yeah.
Way later. That I mean, as you know, Dave, we're looking at the scroll of the Torah of Moses, the Moses scroll. If this is what it claims to be, then this is the original text. The stories, the embellishments, and the fabrications that revolve around this document we find in Exodus, and I would absolutely suggest that came much later than 1274. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So we have a reference here. This is one of the references. The next one is all the way in G, in GA. So the reference is fragment G, which is a 5-column fragment. GA4. It says, "Remember what Elohim did to Pharaoh and to all of Egypt, so will Elohim do to all your enemies." All right. So
Mm-hmm.
that is a statement that something happened to Pharaoh and to all of Egypt, but it doesn't really qualify, right?
And the only thing that we can get from that, Ross, is that it's something that is so significant that we should be able to look back in history and go and pinpoint a moment and go, this must be what it's referring to. Otherwise, what is the point of writing something of saying something like that if it's going to fade into memory
Now, one theory that some people have,
or
as
out
you
of
know,
memory?
Jono,
Mm.
is that the Egyptians are going to record their history, but they're certainly not going to record their defeats. This is the idea. But according to
Hmm.
what you're saying, the study of the Battle of Kadesh does reveal that Egypt is defeated in a very certain way.
They take an absolute whipping.
Yeah,
What happens is they're on their way up to Kadesh. They encounter what they believe to be two Shasu slaves, and they say to them, "Where are the Hittites? Do you know?" And these two slaves say, "You know what? Let's just. I mean, we don't have the names. Let's call them. I don't know, Joshua and Caleb, for example." And these two Shasu slaves say to them, "Oh, yeah. Well, we were actually with the Hittites, and they're far away. They're far. They're still all the way back in such and such." And Pharaoh's like, "All right, so we've got some time to take some strategic points here." And so they fly ahead because he's divided his army into four battalions, if you like, and he's out in front, and he just goes, "Oh, let's go and take all this area around here, and we'll be ready for them." Unbeknownst to him, these two, let's call them spies, have tricked them and laid a trap for them, putting them into an ambush because the Hittites are already there and they're hiding and they're waiting for Pharaoh to arrive. So Pharaoh steams ahead with his battalion, if you like, and then the battle begins and it is on, and they are outnumbered. And it's a difference between two different. I could go on with this. Really, really cool. It's a
yeah,
difference between two different styles of chariots now. Uh, the the Egyptians have upgraded their chariots to 2-man, 2-horse chariots, whereas the Hittites still have the older, larger, bulkier, stronger 3-horse chariots, and it is on.
yeah.
And who's going to win? You've got to read about it, boys and girls. It's really cool. But the whole thing is thoroughly documented. We know an enormous amount about it. But Pharaoh falls into this trap and takes an absolute whipping. Now, Pharaoh does survive, and he does go back and he tells everyone, "I did all this by myself." In fact, there's reliefs, picture of, Pharaoh with all these.
That's what, if I were Pharaoh, I would be. It's like Sylvester Stallone. I'm going to win the fight if I'm making my own movies, right?
This is that's it. So he goes back and makes his own movie and tells them that it was actually him alone that fought off the entire army. He was the man, and everyone. And yeah, sure, okay. But he did his best to save face when he returned and said, "No, it wasn't a defeat. We didn't capture Kadesh, sure, but we won anyway."
Yeah.
Now, only about 50 years later, and people can read about this, the first peace treaty, documented peace treaty we have as a result of that. But that's a different story, and it's
Okay. All right.
fascinating as well.
So that on the plagues, or on the biblical Exodus, according
Hmm.
to what we know, and let's just say it this way: the Moses scroll knows that God liberated Israel out of Egypt. it knows that he defeated Pharaoh, and he'll do the same. He calls to their remembrance the things that I did to Pharaoh, I'll do to all your enemies. The next reference says this: because you've been GA9, line 9, fragment G, column A, because you've been a stiff-necked people from the day that he brought you out of Egypt until today, you've been rebellious against Elohim, your Elohim. Interesting. And then the last one is from GC, fragment G, column C, line 1 and 2 says, let me make sure that my numbering is in that. Yeah, your fathers went down to Egypt with 70 souls, and now you're a people mighty and many. So is that not the basis for what, if you strip away all of the traditional elements, if somebody said, give me the kernel of what this is all about, a people went down to Egypt and became a mighty nation. They were servants there. God defeated the one who enslaved them, liberated them from that, and brought them out, though they, the people he brought out, were rebellious the whole way through. Now, I find it interesting that this text, purportedly an ancient text, has that basic element. Now, when you start looking at other details that we know from the biblical accounts, that we know from the Passover Seder, then you get into these problems, Jono. Were there 10 plagues? Well, it depends on what you read. Listen, I'm going to give people these verses, and I want them to do what we call horizontal study. On the left, I want them to take the column on the left and write the plagues in order from the book of Exodus, from the beginning all the way through. Next column, I want them to take Psalm 78, verse 43 through 51. Write down what were the plagues, how many were there? Not 10. And then I want them to, in the right-hand column, to take Psalm 105, verse 27 through 36, make a list of these plagues. Now, again, people might say, well, it's poetic, it doesn't have to get them all right. These aren't even in order. So it brings up the question, and this is only a question. I want people to ask this tough question. Could it be that somehow, some way, God did some signs and wonders and freed the Israelites from Egypt? And that could have been definitely signs and wonders, however you interpret that. But what were they? Maybe those are later supplied. I think that's what you're suggesting, maybe.
Oh, absolutely. Because
Yeah.
as you just pointed out, the points relating to the Exodus that are found within the Moses Scrolls certainly serve as the skeleton for what later becomes the embellishment of flesh around those points. But when there are embellishments and stories created around that, there's always going to be inconsistencies. Another one that you mentioned was, as it says in the Moses Scrolls, 70 souls go down
Yeah.
into Egypt, and
Yeah.
you're not going to find when you number how many people went to Egypt and all that sort of stuff that's supplied in the book of Exodus in the Moses narrative, it's not going to add up.
Yeah.
So that's another inconsistency there. Before we continue, Dave said it would be interesting to map these out with the new chronology, David Roll.
Yeah.
And Glenn mentioned Roll views Exodus happening in the 12th or 13th dynasty. It would be interesting. I still haven't done that. I haven't studied that out as yet, Dave. I haven't read the book yet. I said I would.
Dave
I haven't done it.
Tyler, he was reading David Roll before it was cool to read David Roll.
Yeah.
And he turned me on to that information. And I just read this past year or two ago, I read his book, his newer book, not Pharaohs and Kings at first. The first one I read was the Exodus, real or mythic, or I don't remember the exact title. It's on my shelf. And then I went and read some of his earlier works. But one of the things that David Tyler has really pushed to me, and I'm convinced of, is that a lot of the dating schemes, the problem is you put it in the 12th, you put it in this, is it the 1400, 1450? Like if you look at 1 Kings 6:1, when it talks about the building of the temple, it says that this happened X number of years, and people do the math and they say, okay, that gives us a 1440, 1450 BCE. And so the fundamentalists will say the reason they're not finding anything in archaeology to support the Exodus is they're looking in the wrong time. It'd be like looking for the founding of America in the year 1970 when it actually happened in the 17th. You see, so they say, well, they're off. The question is, are they off? And according to David Roll, the chronology was pinned into the wall inappropriately or inaccurately, and everybody accepted it. And so then they began to follow the wrong dates. All of that can be explored, but one of the things I just wanted to kind of wind down from my end on tonight is we want people to think for themselves, but also, there are a lot of people who are out there saying, look at these inconsistencies in Christianity and the New Testament, and this text doesn't match that text. And everybody I know says, yay, that's so right, I'm on your team. Yes, you pointed out it. But then if you say, well, wait a minute, let's look at the Hebrew Bible and see if there are inconsistencies. And I've received notes that said, stay away from that. Why would you bring that up? Well, because inquiring minds want to know. I want to get back to the truth. And if the truth is a document that doesn't have anachronistic language, that suggests that the key points are Israel somehow went into Egypt, ultimately became slaves. God freed them from that slavery, brought them. That sounds like a good foundational story, which perhaps later was embellished. And because it was embellished, the scribes didn't cover their tracks very well, and you have inconsistencies in these stories.
Which you can expect if something like that actually did happen. If you're going to put flesh around a skeleton, if you like, or build a story around a foundation, which is the Moses Scroll, you're going to expect inconsistencies, absolutely.
Yeah.
Just coming back to Dave's point, by the way, just very briefly, I remember reading in the last month or so that they found a new pharaoh that they have not had the name of before. I don't recall his name. But it did occur to me, and I did think of this, Dave, at the time. I wonder if that affects dating. Where are they going to place him in the chronology of
Right.
pharaohs? Because it's a brand new pharaoh. They found a tomb, and they're like, we don't know anything about this guy. How long did he reign for? And what where does he slot in exactly? And we know, for example, that Ramses II lived for 90 years, which is impressive. How long did this pharaoh live, and how long was his reign? I guess eventually in the coming year we may get details like that, and Egyptologists will piece it together, and it'll be interesting to see how that affects the chronology. Ross.
One final point. If some have probably already done their Passover Seder, so we haven't ruined that. Although there are all these different meals that people, they go by this calendar, or they wait for the moon to be spotted, or whatever. So there could be. But listen to this. If you said, Ross, come to my house, we're doing lamb tonight. How do you cook the lamb, and what do you never do? What?
Well, personally, I roast the lamb with garlic and rosemary. Oh, you're making me hungry.
And you know why you're doing that? Because Exodus
I love
12:9
lamb.
says this: don't eat of any of it raw, right? Well,
Yeah,
nobody, you
I
probably
want
don't
to do that.
tell a lot of people that. Or cooked in any way with water,
Ugh,
but
let me
roasted,
go on that.
head, legs, entrails over the fire. Don't leave any until the morning. So you're going to
Yeah.
roast it, Jonah. Don't boil it. Would you say boiling is acceptable or no?
No, well, clearly not according to the
Clearly
text.
not.
I'm
But
not so sure that roasting it with the head and the guts and everything is also acceptable. That's what it says to do.
yeah, okay. But
Um,
look, now go to Deuteronomy 16.
mm,
And let's see if I have this right in my notes. I think it's 16:7.
mm,
Now, by the way, in Exodus, you're to do that in your home.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here it says, you shall cook and eat it at the place that the Lord your God will choose. And in the morning, you may start back on your journey home. So you're not doing it at home there. It's only in the place that God will choose, presumably, which later becomes Jerusalem. Now, let me
Mm-hmm.
add something here. I want people to look at the Hebrew. You can do it with a concordance, with a Bible software. But here, where it says cook in the English, is the same Hebrew word that's translated boil in Exodus 12. It says,
Which
don't
says don't
do it.
do that.
And it's here, it says to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, please understand, I know you understand, but I'm telling them, it's not because we want to pick holes in anything. We just want to show that somewhere you can't have both. You can't have one text that says, do it this way and never do it that way. And then another that says, no, 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 do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
There's a problem there. So as we look at these kind of things, there are inconsistencies in the story.
Well,
There's
let's go back to verse 2, by the way. There's another one there. We're talking about a lamb, right? Or a kid. I think you can also use a kid. I think it says in Exodus. Is that right?
yeah, yeah,
Okay, but if we go to 16, verse 2, you shall slaughter the Passover sacrifice of the Lord. This is Deuteronomy, your God, from the flock or from the herd in the place where the Lord will choose. So you can use bovine. You can use a
yeah.
bull or a cow.
Well, I think the important thing to do, and it's what we try to do all the time, and it's part of what exegesis is about, where you're looking at all the available text. Now, most of the time, it's enough that we would look at the text within the Bible. Like if I said, "Well, I want to look at the Moses scroll," some of our viewers may say, "I don't want. That's like I don't have anything to do with the Moses scroll. I've not read your book, and I won't read it, Ross. I just want to know what the Bible says." Well, if the Bible has differences and you only stick with the Bible, that's why I give people exercises. Go look at the account of the
Mm,
plagues in Exodus. Look at Psalm 78. Look at Psalm 105. Which one do you go with?
hmm
And if you say, well, I'm going to go with Exodus, all right, well, then let's look at Exodus and Deuteronomy on how do you cook the lamb. The other thing is this: a lot of people will say, I'm keeping Passover. Like I'm Torah observant and I'm holy, and I'm not like those pagans out there who don't keep the festivals. They're hunting for Easter eggs, and I'm keeping Passover. Well, the honest answer is that none of us are keeping it as it's written.
mm,
Like, because where are we supposed to be? Well, if you read Deuteronomy, you're going to be where? In the place that God will choose, in
mm,
Jerusalem.
mm,
So there are certain inconsistencies. In fact, that's one of the big points that Hezekiah makes when you read in Second Chronicles 30. Hezekiah prays to God on behalf of the people who are not keeping it as written. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things that I could wrap up with tonight is, even though we make mistakes, Hezekiah prayed to God that he would accept us based on our heart. We're trying. We're
mm.
trying to do these things as best we can. And I know that there are some wonderful traditions out there where people are seated around the table with their kids and their grandkids and so forth. So I don't mean to diminish that or make fun of it. I'm not at all doing that. I'm just saying if we want to get historically accurate, we have to consider the text and weigh the text and say, why do we have discrepancies?
Let me be the bad cop
Okay.
in that discussion and just say that in the Moses scroll, one of the commandments is, "Do not lift my name to deceive,
Yeah.
for I will avenge the iniquity." Fathers teaching their sons, their grandsons, their great grandsons lies, deceit, and using my name to do that.
Yeah.
So at the same time, we want to know what is right and what is true, and we want
Right.
to observe as best we can, because we certainly don't want to be lifting God's name to deceive if we're saying that things happen that didn't actually happen. If we're saying that
Yeah.
God did something that he didn't actually do. So we do
Yeah,
want to be careful.
yeah, and one point to back that up, if a person thinks that they are defending God by defending a text and saying, well, this text says this, so I'm going to go with this. I don't care what you say, Ross. Well, if that text says one thing and another text says another, it brings us to this interesting thing, which is coming out in my Jeremiah study. Something Jeremiah saw in his day. Jeremiah said, who are we to say that we are wise and the Torah of the Lord is with us when the lying pen of the scribes has made it into a lie?
Mm.
What does he mean by that? And let me tell you something else he says. We're going to get into all this Saturday morning. Saturday morning, I'm going to talk about this. One of the things that Jeremiah says about the Passover, he mentions he brought you out of Egypt several times. One of the things he says is, when God brought you out of the land of Egypt, he did not command you concerning sacrifices and offerings. But this is what he said: obey my voice.
Mm.
And there's one ancient text that I know of that ties the departure from Egypt with obeying the voice. It's called the Moses Scroll.
Mm.
It's in the context of one of those four passages, and I find that to be quite striking.
Mm.
Interesting.
Yeah.
People have to consider.
Yep. Absolutely. So there's some homework for you, dear viewers. Boy, the comments are coming really quickly,
They
and we don't
really
have time
are.
to get through them because we dedicated ourselves 45 minutes to do this, and now it's 1 hour and 7. We're going to go. But get into it. 'Tis the season, and boys and girls, go and read the wiki on the Battle of Kadesh. Absolutely fascinating. If you'd like to really get in deep as to the parallels that are found in the imagery of the Battle of Kadesh and the Passover story, get Joshua Berman's book, Inconsistencies in the Torah, and it really is fascinating. And of course, read the Moses Scroll. Good heavens, if you haven't got it already, what's going on? The Moses Scroll by Ross Nichols. It is about there. It is. All right, that's good. I don't have to hold it up. Available at Amazon, and these are the words, which is now available on Kindle. Has a Kindle
Oh,
version.
wait, I have a better picture. Look at that one. That one has
Wait,
a
check it
little,
out
look
on
at
a
that.
kid.
It's
There
got a
you
little
go.
iPad
Hey,
there. Anna made that for me. So,
what is there a Are you telling me there's a hardcover for these are the words?
no, that's just a cool picture because she was being prophetic.
There
She
you
did.
go.
She made a hardcover and the Kindle, even though at
Nice.
the time I only had one. So now I'm chipping away at her prophecy. Now
Okay.
the Kindle version is available,
The Kindle
$9.99.
version is available. Go to Amazon. You can find it there. And of course, Tanakh Tours. If you haven't signed up already, get onto it because the Egypt Jordan leg of the tour is filling fast. And but there is g'day Derek. Yep, and Anna. We're just talking about you guys, and we would love for you to join us. And it
That's right.
really is. We're going to be touching on all this stuff at the right there where it happens. So it's going to be fun. We will be back this time next week.
That's right.
There it is. Thanks for tuning in, boys and girls. See you then.
Hey, have a beautiful week.